In the summer of 1973, Mae Hollis, at 24 years of age, learned that her world was about to be irrevocably altered, not by a letter, not by a town meeting, but by the sight of a man hammering a wooden stake with a fluorescent pink ribbon into the earth, 50 feet from her grandfather's oldest apple tree. She stood on her porch, wiping her hands on her apron, the morning's dew still clinging to the clover in her fields. The man, clad in a crisp shirt that had no place in the Vermont humidity, didn't look at her. He looked at his map, at his transit, at the stake, at anywhere but the farmhouse that had stood on this land for a century. Mae walked out to him, her boots sinking slightly into the soft soil. The land was awake. It was a feeling she knew in her bones, a warmth that rose from the ground itself. The man finally acknowledged her, a brief, dismissive nod. "Morning," he grunted, packing up his equipment. "Can I help you?" Mae asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the firmness of someone who belonged where she stood. "Just surveying," he said, folding the legs of his tripod. "For the new development." Mae's heart went still. "Development? Campground?" he clarified, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Green Mountain Getaway, big one. 200 sites, pool, the works. Going in right here." He gestured with a sweep of his arm across the neighboring parcel, a meadow that had been fallow for a decade but which buffered her farm from the county road. The gesture, however, bled over his imaginary line, his hand passing through the air where her corn would be planted next week. He didn't seem to notice or care. He saw a line on a map. She saw a living boundary that she and her father had walked every season of her life. "No one told me," she said, the words feeling small and useless. He shrugged, a gesture of profound indifference. "Not my department. My job's just to mark the lines. They'll be breaking ground in a month." And with that, he was gone, leaving the pink-ribboned stake behind as a garish, alien monument to her own irrelevance. The men who followed him over the next weeks were of the same mind. They arrived in trucks that groaned under the weight of their own power, their tires carving deep wounds into the soft shoulder of the road. They were loud, confident men who saw the land as a problem to be solved, a thing to be flattened and paved and conquered. They saw Mae Hollis, a young woman working the farm alone since her father's passing 2 years prior, as a temporary fixture, a ghost already fading from the landscape. They'd lean against their pickups during their breaks, drinking coffee from thermoses, and watch her guiding her old tractor through the rows. They didn't see a farmer. They saw a girl playing house, an anachronism whose time was up. The whispers in town confirmed their appraisal. "She can't last," the men at the feed store would say. "That campground noise, the lights, the people, it'll drive her out. She'll sell. She has to." It was a foregone conclusion. The gatekeeper, a developer from the city named Mr. Harrison, drove by once in a gleaming sedan, his face a mask of urban impatience. He slowed, looked at her fields, then at the farmhouse with its peeling paint, and then accelerated away. He had seen all he needed to see, a problem that money would eventually solve. Now, let me explain something about Mae Hollis. She was not a fighter in the conventional sense. She did not write letters to the editor or organize petitions. Her defiance was quieter, rooted in the very soil she worked. She had been born in that house, and the farm was not a piece of property to her. It was a repository of memory, a living extension of the people who had come before her. It was her grandfather's hands, calloused and kind, showing her how to test the sweetness of a melon by its scent. It was her father's voice, a low rumble, explaining how the angle of the sun in September told you when to bring in the last of the squash, The farm was a conversation across generations, and she was not about to let it be silenced by the roar of a bulldozer. The expectation that she would sell was, to her, a fundamental misunderstanding of who she was and what she was doing. The world in 1973 was rushing toward convenience, toward things that were fast and disposable. Small farms like hers were being consolidated or paved over, relics of a slower time. The conventional wisdom, the wisdom of men like Mr. Harrison and the gossips in town, was that progress was inevitable and that her way of life was an impediment to it. They believed the future was a place you could visit for a weekend, with a heated pool and pre-packaged fun, not a place where you put down roots and worked until your back ached. Her grandfather would have laughed at the idea. Let me tell you about him. He was a man of quiet, profound wisdom, a man who had farmed this same land through the Great Depression and a world war. He saw the world not in dollars and cents, but in cycles of sun and rain, of planting and harvest. He believed that the land remembered. It remembered kindness and it remembered neglect. He taught Mae not through lectures, but through labor. They'd walk the fields together and he would crumble the soil in his hands. "Feel that?" he'd ask. "It's like cake. That's from the clover we planted last year. You give the land a gift, it gives you one back." He taught her to diagnose an engine knock by its rhythm, to predict a frost by the clarity of the stars, to understand that debt was a storm cloud that could rot a farm from the inside out. He never owed a bank a single dime for this land. "You don't own the land, Mae," he'd say, his voice serious. "You're just its keeper for a while. Your job is to leave it better than you found it." He saw the interconnectedness of things. He knew that the health of his cows was tied to the health of his pasture, which was tied to the health of the insects in the soil, which was tied to the way he farmed. It was a holistic, patient philosophy that had no place in the fast-paced world of real estate development. When he passed, he didn't leave her a fortune. He left her something far more valuable. He left her the land, free and clear. He left her a set of tools, worn smooth by his own hands, each with its own story. And he left her a stack of handwritten journals, bound in cracking leather. For 40 years, he had recorded everything: weather patterns, crop yields, soil conditions, notes on which varieties of beans stood up best to blight, which apple trees were late to bloom. But it was more than data. It was a philosophy written in dirt-stained ink. One entry from 1948 read, "The world is getting faster. People forget what real food tastes like. They forget the satisfaction of a thing grown with their own hands. A man who forgets that is a man who is already lost." And that was the secret. That was the piece of wisdom Mae Hollis possessed that the men in their gleaming trucks could never understand. Let me stop and ask you something. Have you ever felt that longing for something real? For the taste of a tomato picked warm from the vine? For the smell of hay in a barn? For the simple, profound quiet of a field at dusk? Mae knew from a place deeper than intellect that the people who would pay to stay in the plastic, prefabricated world of the Green Mountain Getaway were the very people who were most starved for the authenticity she possessed. The campground wasn't her enemy. It was her market. They were building a corral, and they were about to fill it with hundreds of hungry souls, hungry for the very thing she, and she alone, could provide. So, she did not sell. She did not complain. She made a quiet, decisive act. As the bulldozers began their terrible work, carving a raw red scar into the landscape next door, Mae went to the old milking parlor, long since unused as she'd shifted to mostly vegetable crops. With wood milled from a fallen oak on her own property, she began to build. She built a small, simple structure near the fence line, a little shed with a wide-open front and a sturdy counter. She painted it the same white as her farmhouse and topped it with a simple, hand-lettered sign that read, Hollis Farm. That was all. It was an act of profound faith, a quiet declaration of her intention not just to survive, but to endure. The subsequent 2 years were a masterclass in patience. The construction of the campground was a constant, grinding assault on the senses. The day began at dawn with the percussive slam of hammers and the high-pitched whine of saws. A perpetual haze of dust settled on her lettuce, a fine grit that had to be washed away leaf by leaf. The deep, guttural roar of the earth movers became the soundtrack to her life, a constant reminder of the brute force being exerted just beyond her fence. At night, it was no better. Huge floodlights meant to allow for round-the-clock work bleached the darkness from the sky. The land was not allowed to sleep. Her grandfather had taught her about the rhythms of the night, about the way the soil cooled and settled, the way nocturnal pollinators did their crucial work. The artificial daylight disrupted everything. The crickets fell silent. The patterns of the owls were broken. The land was disoriented, and Mae felt its confusion in her own weary bones. The whispers from the community continued, now tinged with a kind of pity. They saw her out there day after day, tending her rows while a modern resort rose up beside her. They saw a losing battle. That poor girl, they'd say. She's working herself to the bone for nothing. Stubbornness is a Hollis trait, but this is just foolish. Mr. Harrison, the developer, would occasionally drive his sedan slowly down the road, his eyes sweeping over her property with an appraiser's coldness. He was waiting. He was certain that any day now a for sale sign would appear. He never stopped. He never acknowledged her existence with so much as a wave. To him, she was a remnant, a piece of the past that needed to be cleared away. There was a moment in the second year of the construction where she almost believed them. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? It was a Tuesday in late August. A diesel generator from the construction site had been running for 3 days straight, a monotonous, throbbing drone that vibrated through the floorboards of her house and into her teeth. A freak summer wind had blown a cloud of fine concrete dust over her prized tomato patch, coating the ripening fruit in a ghostly gray film. She had spent the entire afternoon trying to gently wash it off, but she knew many would be ruined. That evening, exhausted and smelling of diesel fumes, she sat at her kitchen table, her head in her hands. The noise was a physical presence, a weight pressing down on her. For the first time, she felt a profound, crushing doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was a fool's errand. The world had changed, and maybe there was no place left for a farm like this, for a person like her. She pulled out one of her grandfather's journals, the leather cool and smooth beneath her fingers. She opened it to a random page, her eyes blurry with fatigue. The entry was from the summer of 1934, the height of the Dust Bowl, though Vermont had been spared its worst. He wrote about a punishing drought, about how the corn withered on the stalk and the creek ran dry. Neighbors had sold their farms for pennies on the dollar, giving up. The entry was bleak, cataloging loss after loss. But at the very end, he had written a short, simple sentence. The land is tired, but it remembers the rain. My job is to be here when it comes. He was right. Her job was not to fight the storm, but to outlast it. Her job was to be here when the rain came. She closed the book, the doubt washing away, replaced by a calm, quiet resolve. She stood up, went to the pantry, and began sorting through her canning jars. The rain was coming. The first signs of it arrived the next summer, after the campground finally opened. It was a Saturday. The campground was a city of nylon and aluminum, a riot of colorful tents and gleaming recreational vehicles. The air, once filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, now carried a whiff of charcoal lighter fluid and bug spray. But then, a family of four, a father, a mother, two young children, wandered away from the designated nature trail and up to her fence line. They just stood there watching her as she cultivated a row of beans. The little boy pointed. "Look, real chickens," he shouted, his voice filled with wonder. Mae smiled. She walked over to them. "Hello," she said. The father looked almost embarrassed, as if caught trespassing. "Sorry to bother you. Well, you don't see this every day." He gestured vaguely at the fields, the barn, the entire tableau of her life. "Would you like some eggs?" Mae asked, her heart beating a little faster. "They were laid this morning." The mother's face lit up. Mae went to the little stand, which she had stocked that morning more out of hope than expectation. She had a few dozen eggs, some early lettuces, and 20 jars of the strawberry preserves she'd put up the month before. The family bought 2 dozen eggs, a head of lettuce, and a jar of preserves. The father handed her a $10 bill. It felt heavier than any money she had ever held. It was not just a transaction. It was a connection. It was the first drop of rain. The next day, the family came back with their neighbors from the campsite next to them. The day after that, 3 more families appeared. Word began to move through the campground. A quiet current of information passed from one campsite to the next. The talk was not of the chlorinated pool or the scheduled activities, but of the woman at the farm next door. The woman with the bright red strawberries and the eggs with yolks the color of the sunset. By the 3rd weekend, it was no longer a trickle. It was a steady stream. On Saturday morning, she watched from her porch as a line of people formed along the fence line before she had even opened the stand. They were drawn by a force stronger than any marketing brochure. They were drawn by the sight of something authentic in a world of artifice. They stood there, looking at her fields, breathing in the smell of real dirt and growing things, and they waited patiently. That was the day the undeniable harvest began. She sold out of everything: eggs, milk from her 2 cows, every vegetable she had picked, every jar of preserves, every loaf of bread she had baked, by 11 in the morning. People were disappointed to find the shelves bare. The next weekend, she doubled her stock. She sold out by noon. The weekend after that, she picked everything that was ready, baked until 2 in the morning, and enlisted a neighbor's boy to help her. She sold out by 1. The scene at her little farm store was a quiet, joyous rebellion. Campers who had paid good money for a curated outdoor experience were abandoning the campground's scheduled canoe races and guided hikes to spend their mornings at her farm. They brought their children to watch her milk the cows. They asked questions about cover crops and composting. They weren't just customers. They were pilgrims, seeking a connection they didn't even know they had lost. The campground's own general store, with its rows of potato chips and shrink-wrapped hot dogs, sat empty. The manager's gleaming sedan was now often parked where he could watch the line of his own customers, queuing up to give their money to the woman he had dismissed as an obstacle. Then, one weekday afternoon, it happened. The acknowledgement. Mae was in her store, wiping down the empty shelves and planning her picking for the next weekend, when she saw a figure walking across the field from the direction of the campground. It was not a customer. It was Mr. Harrison. He wasn't driving his car. He was on foot, his expensive city shoes sinking into the soil, and he walked not with the stride of a conqueror, but with the hesitant steps of a man about to surrender. He stopped before the stand, his eyes taking in the simple, sturdy construction, the clean-swept floor, or the empty shelves. He looked tired. He looked defeated. He cleared his throat. Miss Hollis. It was the first time he had ever spoken her name. Mr. Harrison, she replied, her voice even. She did not stop her work. He gestured at the stand, a sweeping motion that encompassed the entire phenomenon. How? He asked. It was a simple question, but it contained a universe of confusion and disbelief. We have a pool. We have a game room. We have activities planned all day. How did you do this? Mae finally stopped her wiping and looked him directly in the eye. She thought of her grandfather's journals, of the quiet wisdom held in their pages. She could have told him about authenticity, about the human soul's longing for connection to the earth. She could have given him a lecture on the failure of his manufactured world. But she chose a simpler truth. I didn't do anything, Mr. Harrison, she said. I just kept farming. He was silent for a long moment, the sounds of her farm, a distant moo from the pasture, the clucking of the hens, filling the air between them. He, the man of noise and progress, was standing in a circle of quiet, productive life. We were wrong, he said, the words coming out slowly as if they were difficult to form. When we planned this place, we saw you. We saw your farm as a problem, an eyesore, something to be gotten rid of. We never once considered you. He shook his head, a small, bitter laugh escaping his lips. And now my customers are spending more time here than at their own campsites. They're coming to the Green Mountain Getaway to visit Hollis Farm. Then came the pitch. He explained that their bookings for the following year were down. The feedback they were getting was all about her. The one thing people loved about his campground was the thing that wasn't his. He needed her. He wanted to feature her farm in their official brochures. He wanted to build a proper, handsome gate in the fence between their properties, to formalize the path his customers had already worn in the grass. He wanted, in essence, to purchase the authenticity he could not create. And in that moment, the power shifted completely. She, the girl who was supposed to be a ghost, was now the one with the power to dictate terms. She listened patiently until he was finished. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply embodied the quiet, unshakable strength of the land she served. All right, Mr. Harrison, she said. Here is what we are going to do. She set her terms. He would pay for the construction of the new, wider path and the gate to her exact specifications. He would pay a yearly fee, not for the right to use her farm's name, but for the damage his construction and his lights had done to her land's natural rhythms, a tithe for the disruption. Her store hours would remain her own. She would not be beholden to his schedule. The brochure would state clearly that Hollis Farm was a separate, private enterprise, and it would include a short paragraph, which she herself would write, about the farm's history and its philosophy of sustainable agriculture. He was not to advertise her as an attraction or an amenity. She was a farmer, period. He agreed to every single term without hesitation. He had no choice. He shook her hand, a gesture that felt less like a business deal and more like a plea. Let me tell you what happened over the long view. The decades that followed were a quiet testament to Mae's victory. She never expanded too fast. She never took on debt. She grew her business the same way she grew her crops. Slowly, organically, with patience and care. The little farm stand became a beautiful, permanent farm store, built with timber from her own woods, with a wide porch and rocking chairs where people could sit and look out over the fields. The campground, now inextricably linked to her success, survived, but it was forever changed. It was no longer the main event. It was the dormitory for people visiting Hollis Farm. Mae Hollis is an old woman now. Her hair is the color of snow on the mountain, but Her eyes are as clear and observant as they were on that morning in 1973. She owns her farm, all of it, free and clear. It is one of the most successful small farms in the state, a destination for people from all over the country. She is no longer the underestimated girl, but a respected elder, a matriarch of the local food movement. Though she would never use such a term herself, she is, as she has always been, a farmer. Just last year, I saw her out by the old milking parlor, the site of her first little stand. She was with her granddaughter, a girl of about 10 with Mae's same quiet eyes. They were shelling peas, their hands moving in a practiced, steady rhythm. After a while, Mae went into the house and came back out with a worn, leather-bound book. She handed it to the girl. It was her grandfather's journal. She was passing the torch. The conversation across generations was continuing. They thought progress was a bulldozer, a swimming pool, and a brochure full of empty promises. They thought the future was something you could pave over the past. But Mae Hollis knew the truth. She knew that real value doesn't scream for attention. It grows quietly, in good soil, tended by patient hands. The campground came to sell a fleeting escape, a manufactured memory. Mae simply offered a piece of the truth, a taste of something real. And she discovered it was the only thing people were ever truly hungry for. The land remembered her grandfather's kindness, and in the end, it rewarded hers.